Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Gaming here, back to the video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the Arcane Mage, just kind of how to play them. Just going to be more of a beginner's guide to intermediate. Everything that you follow in this guide should be able to get you up to at least a 10 key. That's kind of the standard that I try to place in front of these videos. So if you just follow along, we'll go over like the opener, the single target, the AOE rotation, and then for like the brand new players, we're just going to go over like some of the spells, kind of how they work, how they interact with each other, and just kind of like the core of Arcane Mage. That being said, let's go ahead and get started here. So if you're brand new to Arcane Mage, the way that we work is we work off of a Arcane Charge system. So you can see as I use my Arcane Blast, I'm building up these charges, and then I can dump those charges with Arcane Barrage or a similar spell. So we'll go over what those spells are here in just a second, but just know that we kind of work off this Arcane Charge system, and most of your hard-hitting spells spin these charges. So it's kind of like a builder, spender sort of specialization. So your main single target spell is going to be Arcane Blast here. Blast the target with energy, dealing damage. Each Arcane Charge increases by 123% and mana cost by 100% and reduces cast time. So with our Arcane Blast, it's going to be cheap. It's not going to deal as much damage, and it's going to be a slower cast time. And as we get more charges, the cast time goes further and further down until you get to that fourth charge, where it becomes a very quick to cast. Another core spell we have here is our Arcane Missiles. Now, you can only cast this during something called Clear Casting. So, Clear Casting is just going to proc sort of passively. So, casting Arcane spells has an 8% chance to grant access to Arcane Missiles or make your next Arcane Explosion free. So, I kind of share what that looks like. We'll just cast some Arcane Blast here until we can get this to proc. So here we go. We got one proc of it. The stacks up to 2, and you can see now we can cast Arcane Missiles, and our Arcane Explosion is glowing too. But for Arcane Missiles, we can cast it now, and that's kind of what the animation looks like. It'll do single target damage for us. Cover that more a little bit in depth here in a bit. Another core spell that we have is Arcane Orbs. So let me pull that up. Arcane Orbs, 20-second cooldown, grants 1 charge when cast, and every time it deals damage. So it's just orb that you throw out, and it deals some like low to moderate damage. The main thing though is, I'll show you here, is it builds up our Arcane Charges. So we'll throw out our orb, and it hit 4 or 5 targets, so it built us to maximum Arcane Charges just by pressing that one button. So we'll see how that fits into our rotation. And then the main way that you dump Arcane Charges is with a spell called Arcane Barrage. The more charges, the more damage it does. So we pressed this a couple times already, but just to show you, it kind of barrages out, and it kind of did like an AOE cleave. And the way that works is it's going to deal more damage, or it's going to hit more targets based on your Arcane Charges. And then the final, I guess, core spell I'm going to talk about here is going to be your Arcane Explosion. And you just kind of press it. You do this explosion around you, and it will build up Arcane Charges for you slowly. That's kind of like your core base spells. You also have some cooldowns that we utilize. We have Evocation. Evocation it's going to restore your mana, but the main way that's really used is just going to give you an intellect buff. So we'll kind of cast it here, and you can see we're getting stacks of something called Siphon Storm. So you can use that in like your opener or just kind of generally in your rotation, and it'll give you a big damage amp for using that. We also have something here called Arcane Surge. This is going to dump all of your mana, and it's going to do like a huge amount of damage to one target. This will also generate that clear casting proc that we talked about earlier, and this will also give us a lot of mana regen. So you don't have to evocation behind this. Your Arcane Surge, we'll just cast it here so I can show you. We're going to nuke this target, and you can see our mana regen is now increased exponentially. And if you use it at full mana, it doesn't actually use all your mana. The max it can use is 2.9 million right now, and we have 3.4 base. And then another core cooldown that we have is something called Touch of the Magi. This is going to generate 4 of those Arcane Charges that we've already talked about, and this is going to kind of soak up the damage that you do to one target, and it's going to explode that damage out after a set amount of time. So the way this works is you put it on a target, and you'll pump a ton of damage into that one specific target, and then after this expires, just kind of show you, it's going to explode and do a whole bunch of damage. 1, 2, 3. And there's that explosion effect. And then the final spell I want to talk about here is something called Shifting Power. Shifting Power is not used for damage. It's used for the cooldown reduction that is associated with it. Each tick that you channel this is going to give you some CDR. I kind of show you how that works really quick. So let's channel our Evocation. And we can see it's on cooldown here. And then we'll Shifting Power behind that. And watch the cooldown of Evocation. And you can see it's already a quarter through its cooldown. So you want to use Shifting Power to get your spells back off cooldown. Okay, that's some of the core stuff. So one of the issues that a lot of people have playing Arcane Mage is you're going to run out of mana quite a bit. This is one of the only DPS specs in the game that actually manages their mana. But just know that it is actually okay to run out of mana. You have a ton of tools to regenerate your mana. You have Arcane Surge, which we talked about, which will regenerate it. You have Evocation, which will regenerate it. So just kind of keep that in mind. Arcane Mage has several fail safes built into the spec to get your mana up. The other thing you have to be careful of is the Arcane Orbs. So the problem with Arcane Orbs is, I'll just give you an example here. Let's say that we want to attack these dummies and we throw an Arcane Orb at it. It does not stop at that target. It continues to go through, and if these were enemy mobs, it would have pulled them. So you do have to be careful when you send your orb. You want to face it towards a wall of some sort. You just got to position with the tank. And then the last thing you really need to know before we get into like the opener and stuff is with Arcane Mage, you have a very specific order that like all DPS specs have a very specific order they have to press their buttons in, but you have two phases. You have a big burn and a mini burn phase playing as Arcane Mage. We'll talk about those, but the big burn essentially is when you have Evocation and Arcane Surge up. And your mini burn is when you only have Touch of the Magi up. So if you look at Touch of the Magi and if you look at Arcane Surge, they're in increments of 45 seconds. So every other Touch of the Magi, you'll be able to loop in with your Arcane Surge and Evocation. So as of right now in Season 3, we are playing Sun Fury versus Spellslinger. So what's the difference between those two in terms of gameplay? So Spellslinger is going to typically rely more on like sending a bunch of Arcane Orbs. And right now, which I personally do not like that playstyle, it is fun. It's just kind of hard to play in Mythic Plus. I think they need to rework how Arcane Orb works in general. Just because you can butt pull with it so easily. It's so annoying. But we also have Sun Fury. And this is going to kind of work more like the traditional Arcane Mage where you're building up Arcane Charges. You're spending them on Arcane Barrages. So let's just quickly look at Sun Fury, right? We have Spellfire Spheres here at the top. This is going to increase your spell damage by 1%, stacks up to 5 times. If you look over your head, that's these little spheres that are above your head so that you can easily track those. Then at the bottom here, we have Memory of Alar. Let's go ahead and use this other view. Yeah, I like this view better. Memory of Alar. While under the effects of a casted Arcane Surge, you gain twice as many stacks of Mana Cascade. We've not talked about that yet, but we will. And then when your Arcane Phoenix expires, it empowers you, granting Arcane Soul for 2 seconds, plus an additional 1 second for each exceptional spell at a cast. So what is Arcane Soul? That's down here at the bottom. Arcane Barrage grants clear casting and grants 4 Arcane Charges. And then each time that you cast Arcane Barrage is going to increase the damage of your next one. It's going to stack up to 150%. So let's first start with Mana Cascade. What is that? So casting Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage grants you haste that stacks up to 10 times. So whenever you Arcane Surge, you're going to get a whole bunch of stacks of haste. You're going to basically gain them at twice the rate while under Arcane Surge. And then, most of this tree is actually going to play around Arcane Surge. So you'll see that pop up a lot. So right here at the top, we also are talking about like this Phoenix that spawns. So what is that? That comes from Invocation Arcane Phoenix. Whenever we cast Arcane Surge, we're going to summon this Arcane Phoenix. It's just going to do some passive damage for us. And then when that expires, it's going to be the last part of this tooltip. It's going to grant us the Arcane Soul, which is at the very bottom of the tooltip. And that's basically going to empower our Arcane Barrage. So something you got to kind of track. And you want to know when you're under an Arcane Soul, essentially, because you are massively buffed. So let's take a quick look at that, right? We can come in here. We can Arcane Surge, right? And we can cast some Arcane Blast. And you can see we're getting 2 stacks of Mana Cascade per Arcane Blast. But then let's go ahead and dump an Arcane Barrage. Then when this expires, when this Phoenix expires, now we're under that Soul. And you can see we're not losing stacks of Arcane Barrage. And you can just kind of spam it. And you notice our character kind of turned transparent there. And then we had an icon above our character's head here. It's like a little triangle Illuminati looking thing. And that means you're under the soul effect, and that just means that you can pretty much unleash arcane barrages. Okay, so our opener is typically going to look something like this. You'll want to mirror image a full seconds before the pull. You'll want to channel a full evocation for Siphon Storm. From here, you'll use a tempered potion. You'll go into arcane missiles. You will lust. You will arcane surge, and then you'll touch of the Magi, and that will get you started with your big burn phase. So that's going to be your typical opener in both single target and AOE. Now, when you do go into your single target and AOE rotations, the overall goal is to stay at max arcane charges for maximum damage for as long as you possibly can. So after you go into your opener, then you can go into your single target priority. Let's talk about that first. This right here is going to be our single target priority. So one of the main things that you always want to try to keep up is something here called Nether Precision. And we did not talk about that yet, but that's going to be over here on the right. Consuming clear casting increases the damage of your next 2 arcane blast or arcane barrages by 30%. So how do you get Nether Precision? That's going to come from our arcane missiles, right? When we consume that clear casting proc that we talked about, we get a buff of Nether Precision. And then you can spend those charges on arcane blast or arcane barrages. So your main priority, anytime you're in an arcane soul, you need to prioritize your Nether Precision, and then you need to prioritize spamming arcane barrages. And directly after your arcane soul ends, we want to go into a shifting power because we want to get back into arcane soul as often as we possibly can. And the only way to do that is through our arcane surge that we talked about earlier. So after a big burn phase ends, always go into a shifting power. Always follow up a big burn with a shifting power, and you want to try to keep your shifting power in line with your arcane surge as much as you possibly can. And most of the times you will be able to do that because by the time that arcane surge is a minute and a half, but by the time that arcane surge, you go through your opener, you cast all those arcane barrages through arcane soul. This cooldown is going to be at about a minute left, and then you can go into a shifting power and you can get an additional 12 seconds off of that and really turn that arcane surge into take it down from a minute to 45 seconds. Your next priority is going to be arcane missiles with clear casting. If you don't have any Nether Precision stacks, so always make sure you're getting Nether Precision stacks. You do need to track this with some sort of weak aura. And if you do lose those stacks, you need something flashing at you red saying, hey, get these stacks back up because you're losing a lot of damage if you don't use those. After that, we're going to be arcane orbing. And you want to arcane orb anytime that you get under 3 arcane charges. Is going to allow you to get your charges up very quickly. From here, we'll be arcane blasting with something called Lay Drinker. We've not talked about that yet. Lay Drinker is over here on the right-hand side. So this actually comes from consuming your clear casting procs. And this, whenever you consume clear casting, you have a 40% chance to make your next arcane blast echo, repeating damage at 70% effectiveness. So this is something else you need to track. And whenever this does proc, you need to be following this up with a double. It's essentially a double casted arcane blast. And then one minor tip here is that Touch of the Magi will also grant Lay Drinker for us. So just a kind of minor damage amp there. Up next, we're going to Arcane Barrage when you have Glorious, Incandescence, or Intuition. We're not talking about either of those yet, I don't believe. So Intuition, casting a damaging spell has a 5% chance to make your next Arcane Barrage to 50% increased damage and generate 4 arcane charges. So essentially what this is doing is this is making your arcane barrage not cost any arcane charges because it just grants us 4 back anyways, and you get a 50% damage amp. So this allows us to arcane barrage in the middle of our single target rotation and not drop charges. And then we also have a Glorious Incandescence. So what is that? So that's going to be right here. Consuming Burden of Power causes your next arcane barrage to the 20% increased damage. Grant 4 arcane charges and call down a storm of 4 meteorites at your target. So it's literally the same thing as Intuition here. It's just a separate buff that you have to track. It doesn't do as much damage as Arcane Cleave here does, or excuse me, as Intuition does. But just another proc that you'll need to track, and this is going to allow you to sneak in a free arcane barrage in there. We also talked about Burden of Power. Anytime that we actually conjure up one of those spheres above our head, we're going to get a decent little buff to our Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage. Nothing necessarily to play around there. Moving on in the priority list, we're going to cast Arcane Explosion if you have less than 2 charges and do not have clear casting. So Arcane Explosion in single target is kind of niche, but you will use it if you need to quickly build Arcane Charges, because it doesn't have a cast time associated with it. You literally just go up, press the button, and you get Arcane Charges. So it's a very quick way to get to 2 Arcane Charges. And you can see this is what your Intuition proc looks like, by the way. So you don't have to have a separate weak R for that. It has a built-in proc. And then your last 2 priorities is just literally spam Arcane Blast. When you get low on mana, dump with Arcane Barrages, dump those charges, and then start building back up with Arcane Blast. Right, so when you dump charges, what that would look like is there'll be 2 Arcane Explosions, and then you'll start building again with Arcane Blast. Okay, let's quickly take a look at the AoE. So AoE, everything stays the same. Your first 2 priority steps stay the same. Where things kind of change a little, or it's like an additional step, it's going to be here in step 3. So cast Arcane Barrage if Intuition or Arcane Tempo will expire before your next cast completes. We didn't even talk about Arcane Tempo. That's going to be right here. So consuming Arcane Charges increase your haste by 2%, stacks up to 5 times. Pretty passive. This is just going to be stacking by itself. You don't really have to track this too much. But in AoE scenarios, you just need to make sure that if you have Intuition or Arcane Tempo up, that the Arcane Barrage is getting buffed by one of those 2. That's really all this line is saying. It's really not something you have to worry about too much, to be honest. More of a min-max thing. Step 4 here, obviously we're going to shifting power after Arcane ends, after we go through that burn phase. Yeah, so these 3 steps here are all 3 the same. And then cast Arcane Barrage with 4x Arcane Charges. So this is a new step. So if you do have an Arcane Orb available, you can dump your 4 Arcane Charges with a Barrage and then just build up to max again with that Orb. So easier to do, obviously, in AoE than single target because there's more targets for that Arcane Orb to actually hit. From here, we'll be using Arcane Barrage with those Glorious Incandescence or Intuition stacks that we talked about in the single target. Then from here, we'll Arcane Explosion again to cheese those first 2 charges if we do drop below 2. And then from here, we will Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage if we are running out of mana. So the question is why do we Arcane Blast and why do we not Arcane Explosion in AoE? So the reason you Arcane Blast is due to how Spellfire Spheres works. So every 6 times you cast Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage, you're going to conjure these spheres, right? And we want stacks of those. But we also get a lot of buffs to our Arcane Blast as well by running Sun Fury. So if we remember from here, Burden of Power, whenever we conjure one of those spheres, we're also getting a buff to our Arcane Blast. So that makes our Arcane Blast quite a bit stronger. And then we're also getting this stack of Mana Cascade. So Sun Fury is just built more around essentially getting buffs with your Arcane Blast and then trying to empower as many Arcane Barrages as you possibly can. All right, so it's based around building up these Burden of Powers, consuming those Burden of Powers to beef up our Arcane Barrages, and you're really playing around a lot around Glorious Incandescence and then Intuition here. And the only way that you can get these procs, right, is by Arcane Blasting. One other thing I did want to quickly discuss is sometimes you'll notice that my Arcane Missiles will hit, or it'll be like AoE instead of single target. So kind of show you what that looks like. Let's see if we can get a proc here. Clear casting proc. So I don't know if this one will do it. I don't think it will. But you can see right now, Arcane Missiles is only single target. So every 3 clear casting procs you get, you're building up something here called Aether Attunement. And whenever that goes up to 3, you can see it's right here. Every 3rd clear casting proc that you consume, your next Arcane Missiles is essentially guaranteed to be an AoE spell and hit more targets. So that's what's happening there. Then just to show you what that looks like right here, this should be an AoE. There you go. It spends all 3 of those charges. And then one other thing I did want to cover quickly is we talked about Intuition as well as Glorious Incandescence. Both of these are built into the UI. They both share the same UI effect, that sort of very transparent purple bars that pop up here on the right-hand side. So this effect right here, both of them share that. So it should be pretty easy to know when you have the beefed up Arcane Barrage. You don't have to install any sort of extra weak Rs or anything for that. All right, guys, hopefully that helps some people out. Just kind of understand the spec and kind of how it works. Some of the, just kind of the method behind the madness there a little bit. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribe to the channel. See you guys in the next one.